Hey truckers, today we're seeing contract marriage, Billionaire and his deaf wife. Let's dive in. Zitsong is getting married. The cool summer sunlight streamed through the dark cafe windows, turning the light hazy and chaotic, making one feel as if in a dream. Nowadays, a divorce is nothing special, and even less so are unmarried couples suddenly turning against each other. Yet, Ji Yuan had never imagined such a thing happening between her and Wa Zitsong. Since middle school, they were classmates, their seats only one row apart, so falling in love over time was expected. Later, fate continued its role, propelling them to the same high school under direct academic recommendations, and eventually to the same university after they tested and got accepted. She studied finance, he learned investment strategies, both in the finance department. Coming from a small town, both of their families were of modest means. In other words, she and Wa Zitsong were a good match in terms of family backgrounds. But it was this very match in backgrounds that received a harsh blow. Water flows down to the low places, people strive to climb up. No one can tolerate humiliation, nor can anyone resist temptation. No wonder, half a year ago, when Wa Zitsong got drunk once, he squinted at her and said, "Ji Yuan, you are good in all aspects but lack one thing." Now, she understood everything. He was not speaking drunken words that day. She lacked money, lacked wealthy parents. For people like them at the bottom, the quickest shortcut to climbing up is to latch onto a big tree. Without substantial initial capital, how can wealth be quickly generated? Just like the stock market, where retail investors are always the ones being harvested, only wealthy people, regardless of the crises they face, thanks to the diversification of their wealth, won't face devastation due to a sudden crisis. Tragedies occur much more frequently among the poor than the wealthy. Otherwise, why would so many people love money? Money can make a ghost grind the mill. Not unexpectedly, having money allowed Wa Zitsong and his mother to change their affections and abandon her, Ji Yuan, for a future filled with monetary prospects. Ji Yuan, who studied finance, was thoroughly versed in the principles of economics. However, she always thought that feelings could not be measured with money. Was she too naive? It turns out, Wa Zitsong believed that choosing a potential stock was not as good as directly selecting a blue-chip stock. The middle-aged woman sitting opposite her was supposed to be her future mother-in-law. Ji Yuan remembered this woman, whom she referred to as Mother Wa, was Wa Zitsong's mother, originally named Liu Xiangyi, and sometimes Ji Yuan also called her Aunt Liu. But Mother Wa always insisted that she just call her Mom. In the past, Aunt Liu's warmth toward her, treating her almost like her own daughter, had indeed made Ji Yuan's heart warm. At that time, she truly believed she would marry into a good family. Thinking back now, Mother Wa merely thought that she came from a modest background, like a small family's precious jade. Not quite matching the rich, but comparably a bit better off than the Wa family economically. Ji Yuan once thought this future mother-in-law was decent. It seemed because both families were ordinary civilians, primarily needing to economize on all household expenses. Before this, Mother Wa had always complained that the coffee shop they now sat in was too luxurious and expensive. Ji Yuan still vividly remembered a saying by Mother Wa, $100 for a cup of coffee might as well be spent on drinking plain water. Yet now, the person who asked her to meet here was Mother Wa. 10 million. She gave Zitsong a startup fund of 10 million. The she Mother Wa mentioned was the wealthy girl engaged to her boyfriend, Wa Zitsong. 10 million, it can make a man and his family completely forget the past. In the world of market economics, there is nothing strange about it. Truly, it's not even worth mentioning. If you were to tell it out loud as a curiosity, journalists wouldn't even consider it news. Ji Yuan thought. Leave Zitsong. If you truly love him, do it for his sake. Being with him, you'll only become his burden. You two would definitely live a hard life. Auntie is saying this for your own good, for your and his future, Wa's mother said, feeling thirsty afterward, and took a sip of the mocha coffee in front of her. Ji Yuan slightly lowered her eyes. To her, such claims of for your own good were naturally dismissed with a laugh, not taken seriously. It was just for the sake of her own son, wasn't it? Selfish people always know how to phrase things beautifully and perfectly, thinking they can deceive everyone. Auntie knows you can't hear, but you can always see money, right? After finishing her coffee, seeing Ji Yuan's lack of response, Wa's mother pulled out a check from her clip and placed it in front of Ji Yuan in a proper manner, 100,000 severance fee. Zitsong is busy with work and preparing for a wedding, it's inconvenient for him to come. Honestly, Zitsong owes you nothing. If it weren't for the prior agreement about your marriage, considering the capacity of your parents to handle this, I've prepared this 100,000. Zitsong has been more than generous to you and your family.
Ji Yuan gently furrowed her brows. She herself didn't care.
Her boyfriend suddenly cheated on her. Shouldn't Ji Yuan look on the bright side instead of considering jumping into a river? But it was her parents who had always regarded Zitsong as a future son-in-law. They never imagined their daughter would be dumped by a boyfriend of 10 years. 10 years, a long 10 years. Anyone would trust in such a decade-long relationship not suddenly deteriorating like a wife suddenly dumped by Chen Shimai. Someone famous once said something along these lines: the longer the courtship, the less likely it correlates with marital success. It seems that was indeed correct.
Men always prefer the new over the old.
After dating for 10 years, just the sight of her face could become tiresome, right? The issue lies in the fact that her parents are rather traditional, always living in their hometown. They might not truly accept the fast-paced ways modern city dwellers end relationships when dissatisfied. Moreover, both had already told their families that they must get married this year. Hence, her parents had withdrawn their savings, preparing for her dowry, part of which was tight since they were planning to buy a new house and make an initial payment. Zitsong said that he was just starting his job and needed to network, so he didn't have much money to save. Being a son without a father and his mother a widow, she had no money to save either. Thus, half of the initial payment was covered by her parents and the other half was collected from friends and her own savings. Women can be rather naive, believing whatever men say. This 100,000 that WA's mother was offering now was just to refund the engagement house's initial payment and attempt to claim the house for herself. To someone who had 10 million, they still cared so much about such a small amount of money. Could such people really be considered family in the future? Calmly, without even looking at the numbers on the check, Ji Yuan pushed it back across the table. Auntie, the initial payment was made by my parents, and although the property deed is under my and Zitsong's names, Zitsong didn't contribute a penny. When this goes to court, the house can only belong to my parents, it will never be WA family's. If we were to sell the house now, the initial payment alone is worth more than 100,000. It's a losing deal, one that you and your son wouldn't want, and neither would I. Since emotions were to be treated as a business, Ji Yuan had no reason to be cheated again. Madame Wu's face suddenly stiffened, and her tone, matching her expression, turned even uglier as she said, I was considering the difficulties you and your family face, which is why I gave you this 100,000. Since you're ungrateful. Anyway, you can't hear, and you don't appreciate others' well-meaning efforts. At this moment, Ji Yuan broke into a smile. Auntie, in consideration of the 10 years of relationship I had with Zitsong, here's a message for Zitsong and you. I'll take the past relationship as a lesson. Your son, I don't fancy him at all.
Madame Wu clearly choked on her own breath at these words.
Ji Yuan picked up her purse, and as she stood up, her gaze inadvertently swept over the bag beside Madame Wu. LV, likely a knockoff from Hong Kong. She wondered if it was bought by herself or a branded bag gifted by the prospective daughter-in-law. Madame Wu, noticing Ji Yuan's gaze landing on her bag, squinted her eyes into a line with a smug smile. Before she could say a word, Ji Yuan spoke in a melodious voice. Auntie, you don't need to explain. After all, Ji Yuan, can't hear. As for the tea, Auntie, you've soared to great heights. It was you who invited me for tea, so Ji Yuan, will accept your kindness. Madame Wu's expression suddenly turned frosty, her eyes quickly scanning the plates on the table. Some were ordered by her, and some by Ji Yuan. 2 cups of mocha, delicate pastries, dozens of plates. Initially, of course, one couldn't start by assigning blame right away, so she pretended to be polite, not expecting the other party to be so ruthless, as if she had already anticipated her son's infidelity and had ordered so much. Ji Yuan walked away from the tea table, casually strolling out without looking back. But behind her, indeed there came a considerable commotion. Hurriedly walking to tend to the aftermath was a waiter, brushing past Ji Yuan.
Ji Yuan did not look back.
How one treats others depends on how they've been treated. If you are unkind, I naturally won't be righteous. Exiting the cafe, at the door was an 8-lane road bustling with traffic. This was the heart of the major city, the Golden Center. 100-story skyscrapers soared into the clouds like a forest within the city, densely packed throughout the urban area. The building, acclaimed to be the 3rd tallest in Asia, was one of the financial centers of the world and symbolized the ultimate power of wealth. The facade of the building seemed to be clad in sunlit gold, with reflective glass and tiles, presenting the entire skyscraper like a beautiful mirage of a shining sea city. Exquisite, looked up to, unattainable. A deadly dream, a lure irresistible. Those who love money would love this place, and even more so the people who could survive here and flaunt the imperial power of money and wealth. Hanging at the intersection of the crossroads was a huge LCD screen, below which advertisements scrolled without cease, offering around-the-clock updates on financial world events from all over the globe. The beautiful anchorwoman, with her radiant smile, spoke in a sweet voice that rippled through the world. The much-anticipated Forbes list of billionaires was finally made public last night at 9:12. Xiao Jianming, chairman of Changda Group, who ranked 6th to 9th last year, has soared to 36th place this year due to outstanding Changda Group performance and business expansion. He has leapfrogged last year's richest person in Southeast Asia and has become this year's wealthiest. The cell phone inside the handbag buzzed to life. Ji Yuan reached into the bag to take out her phone and, since she couldn't hear, could only look at the text. Ji Yuan, latest news, Changda Group is coming to our school for recruitment. Students who study finance generally have 3 career paths. First, they can work as white-collar employees in securities companies, where the money comes quickly, and if done well, one can quickly accumulate a reputation within the circle.
This is the path most people choose. Second is to stay in academia to engage in education or research. This path is generally not accessible to everyone.
The quotas for retaining positions at universities are limited each year. While the earnings can't be said to be a lot, mostly one earns a fixed salary, but there is ample free time to make extra money. For those in finance, trading stocks and the like is not a problem. More importantly, the probability of losing your job in academia is extremely low, which makes it a secure and worry-free type of employment. For graduates of all professions, staying in academia is the first choice for a stable remaining life. The problem is, it's hard to stay. Third, like the previous one, was once called the Golden Road. Today, however, it's somewhat different. That is to take the civil service exam for government agencies. Jobs that used to be as low risk as academia are now more demanding due to a different environment. Hence, given the choice, one would definitely opt for a university position over the civil service exam. These 3 general paths are all jobs that align with a finance major. Other roles that are somehow related to finance can also be done by finance students. For instance, in recent years, due to the development of the internet, group companies have been using the internet for financial innovation, generating many subsidiary industries related to finance. Some companies even regard their finance division as a significant strategic focus for group development. Therefore, if one enters such a company, being perceived as a high priority by senior management can mean a limitless future. In general, students with a degree in finance have broad job prospects compared to other majors, which are not bad at all. Against such a backdrop, graduates like Ji Yuan have more choices. Therefore, their first job must be carefully planned and considered. They need to think about making money and the long-term appreciation potential, and they definitely must not rush into things. The person who sent Ji Yuan the recruitment message from Changda Group was her university classmate named Su Yixia. Because of her unique circumstances, Ji Yuan didn't have many friends. It could be said that Su Yixia was one of her closer friends from university. Su Yixia was now sending her this message in the hope that they would apply to the same company together. Ji Yuan, however, hadn't made up her mind. Zitsong's sudden betrayal had caught her off guard. At the very least, it would be more appropriate to go home and explain things to her parents before coming back to job hunt. Thinking of her parents back home, they were probably busy preparing items such as a washing machine and other dowry goods for her.
Ji Yuan sighed deeply. There are generally 3 ways to go home. Taking a plane required transfers. It was difficult to buy a train ticket.
Most people, like Ji Yuan, who suddenly had to change their plans and rush back, could only choose the cheap and convenient long-distance bus. A dozen hours on the road to the county town seems like a departure from the hustle and bustle of the big city, returning to an idyllic pastoral life. However, if you actually return to the county town, you will be shocked to find that this is just wishful thinking. More than 90% of the county towns across the country have been inevitably swept up in the sudden boom of the real estate industry 8 years ago. Tall residential buildings soaring into the clouds and rural villas claiming to be surrounded by green mountains and clear waters alike have laid siege to the county towns. The Jiu family's home is located in the older part of the downtown area. Called a small property rights house, it's because the landlord of their building sits on collective land. It used to be collective land not affiliated with urban land use. What the current policy is, no one inquires and no one knows.
The Jiu family doesn't want to know either.
Anyway, real estate developers are not coveting their small building. The old downtown area has fallen into decline. If developers wanted their land, they would have to compensate the original residents there. Developers wouldn't make a losing deal like that when they could simply acquire land on the outskirts and develop new areas, couldn't they? With wide roads, convenient transportation, good air quality, they can develop their own ecologically friendly commercial properties and negotiate with the government to build schools. Why stick to the old downtown area, as if it's a major city with no finance centers or office buildings? From the situation of her own home, Ji Yuan knew that real estate was definitely more than just simply buying and selling houses. Nowadays, even ordinary people know that houses aren't for living in, but for speculating. That's the online netizen's sarcasm. Needless to say, there's some truth to it. Would the people who truly like their houses not get tired of living in the same place for years? Houses, in the eyes of finance scholars, have always been an investment commodity, not a place to live. In other words, when ordinary people use houses for living, the property's value is naturally not high. Economists with brains who use houses for investment naturally place much higher value on them. Ultimately, the value of a house depends on human intelligence. This world is a world ruled by intelligence. Those with intelligence can afford to buy houses, to live in the most comfortable homes everywhere. Those without cling to their humble abodes, struggling with decades of mortgage payments and bemoaning their impotence. In truth, the value of housing really does have something to do with intelligence.
Who said that last sentence? Ji Yuan thought for a long time and couldn't recall.
As she was nearing the county town on the long-distance bus, she finally texted Su Yixia to ask.
Who?
Su Yixia sent back an emoji with a mischievous face and a sinister smile with bared teeth. Who else could it be? Isn't it that guy called a prodigal and rogue? Oh right, I heard his dad became the richest man, and now he's the son of the richest man.
Ji Yuan finally remembered.
This person is now massively popular online, arguably more famous than any celebrity. Actually, the identity of the son of the richest man alone is enough to make a person widely known. But honestly, the son of the world's richest man isn't as famous as him.
There's something intriguing about this situation.
You might not have noticed the Weibo he just posted today, Su Yixia continued. The latest comment under his Weibo has already exceeded 10,000.
What did it say? Ji Yuan asked.
Su Yixia sent 2 laughing emojis. You, Ji Yuan, don't like gossip, but you're interested in his stuff? Ji Yuan has never been one for gossip and never had an interest in chasing celebrities. The only thing that could attract her has to do with her field of study. In response to Su Yixia's question, Ji Yuan chose to remain mysteriously silent. Fortunately, Su Yixia didn't press the issue, saying, "What else could it be?"
Just like always, speaking his mind? So thick-skinned. A sharp tongue.
Every word he says could land him in trouble.
But oddly enough,
behind the word especially, Su Yixia didn't know how to describe it. Ji Yuan immediately thought to herself, especially since what he said was all true.
He said I'm even richer now.
No way around it, having money means having good fortune.
Su Yixia posted his Weibo and added a mocking ghost face.
Anyone who dares to say such things is either crazy or asking for trouble. That's what normal people would think. Ji Yuan looked at this sentence and couldn't help but be lost in thought. Then she texted back to Su Yixia. When I get back, let's go to Changda together. Su Yixia was initially delighted, then suddenly remembered something. What did you say?
Where have you gone?
Weren't you going on a honeymoon with Wa Zitsong? Their relationship was well known among those at school who had contact with them. After all, they were childhood sweethearts. Just like Ji Yuan's parents, no one could have imagined that 10 years of love could shatter in an instant. So, for the time being, no one had realized that they had actually broken up. Ji Yuan simply replied with 2 words, "We split." Being from the same school, hearing rumors, there definitely was some truth. Su Yixia across from her fell silent for a long time.
Perhaps she didn't know what to say to comfort her. Ji Yuan closed her phone.
Su Yixia's reaction made her feel suddenly disgusted to a point. Perhaps the last person to know the truth was her, Ji Yuan. Not long after, Su Yixia sent another message. "You didn't accept anything from him, did you? Please don't ask him for anything." Ji Yuan's eyes narrowed. "His mom brought money, and I refused it." "Oh," Su Yixia let out a long sigh, paused for a moment, then added, "He's not as smart as you, Ji Yuan. He'll regret it sooner or later." Those unaware wouldn't know what Su Yixia was referring to. She was talking about the apartment for which Ji Yuan's parents paid the down payment. That apartment was chosen by Ji Yuan alone. Back then, W.A. Zitsong came up with various excuses, unwilling to share the down payment with her. Essentially, W.A. Zitsong didn't value that apartment back then.
The apartment was bought 3 years ago.
Now, the property price has at least doubled since 3 years ago. Moreover, looking at the trend, the appreciation potential for this apartment still exists. This was enough to show that Ji Yuan's investment vision was at least twice as sharp as W.A. Zitsong's. Su Yixia laughed and said, "He studied finance, yet he couldn't even match up to you, and talking about it outside would be a joke. But honestly, Ji Yuan, even I couldn't have imagined that your apartment would appreciate in value." Back then, neither W.A. Zitsong nor Su Yixia could see the potential appreciation of that apartment. Su Yixia candidly asked, "Ji Yuan, how could you have predicted that the government had plans for that area?" When it came to the domestic clan of real estate speculators, they all bet on the appreciation potential of properties. Whether a house could appreciate in value, at the end of the day, wasn't about the construction of the house itself but was related to its location. Ji Yuan wasn't a real estate speculator. Her purchase was initially for a wedding house, a necessary requirement. However, even though it was a necessary requirement, nowadays, which necessary requirement wasn't considered for its worth? When it came to worth, investment issues had to be considered. Thus sometimes, what those financial economists said was merely beautiful in theory. They claimed that for necessary requirements, one needn't worry about investment issues in the property. Did they think people were fools? There was no reason why others could profit from appreciation in their property value, but you couldn't, right? That's just human nature. At least one couldn't do worse than others. Especially those who were financially strapped and needed the property out of necessity, they needed to be more careful with their money. If they could purchase a property with potential for appreciation, it would undoubtedly increase their family's wealth. Later on, even if a sudden family emergency arose that required funds, selling the property and temporarily living in a lesser one, or trying to replicate the appreciation investment again wasn't a better plan. Necessity is just a comforting term coined by financial scholars because they know you don't want to think about this aspect. Ji Yuan could understand that if she wasn't studying finance and preparing for a career in it, having other jobs to focus on, she wouldn't have the leisure or energy to research a property. Truly being able to research the value of a property isn't so easy. When you are caught up in what everyone else is saying and mindlessly following others into the market, the first pot of gold has already been taken by someone else. Since this was her own and her family's first house, Ji Yuan really put a lot of thought into it. Because being a finance student, she understood a principle. A good financier, an investor, must be a prophet. You must spot the gold hidden in the sand earlier than others, the only sober person in a crowd of drunks. Su Yixia stared blankly for several long minutes because how could Ji Yuan know 3 years ago that the land in Zone B would not be enough? After all, she never heard any official mention that Zone B was running out of land. Specifically, what Ji Yuan referred to here as 3 years means 3 years from now.
My God,
Su Yixia said, "Ji Yuan, you're amazing. You actually predicted 6 years into the future." Ji Yuan didn't think she was amazing at all. Anyone who put their mind to research could figure it out. One could make educated guesses from the official statistics, the speed of regional development, and data on incoming population, among others. An even more important point was that the decision-makers were not fools. If the land in Zone B was insufficient, there were only 2 directions to expand. Either reclaim land from the sea in Tuanhai. For the regional leaders of Zone B, maintaining a regional advantage, it was undoubtedly a good choice. However, for the decision-makers at a higher level, this strategy definitely wasn't as good as merging the 2 zones. After the merger, Zone B would drive up the land prices in Zone N, increasing official revenues and making their performance look better. The perfect calculation of the high-level decision-makers was not hard to figure out if someone really put their mind to it. The most crucial point wasn't it that official positions changed hands every few years? A new official would always want to make a significant impact early in their tenure, so seizing this opportunity to achieve multiple objectives was inevitable. A genius? Ji Yuan, was certainly not the only one. Hadn't Changda acquired land there 2 years earlier? Su Yixia shook herself off. They were just graduates, fresh out of school. Could they compare with the think tank of the wealthiest man? At the time Changda acquired land in Zone N, it was very cheap because nobody wanted it. Now, Changda's investment, once looked down upon by others, was as shocking to everyone as Ji Yuan's predictions. This clearly demonstrated that Changda's capabilities were extraordinary. Su Yixia said, "Ji Yuan, no wonder you wanted to go to Changda with me. It turns out you and Changda were already perfectly in tune.
Perfectly in tune? Why did that phrase seem a bit eerie?
The car reached the county's bus station.
Ji Yuan got off the car carrying her simple luggage.
From the bus station to her home, taking a taxi would cost dozens of yuan. Ji Yuan found a motorcycle taxi that locals were accustomed to taking. Riding a motorcycle home would be twice as fast as taking a bus, taking only about 15 minutes to reach her house.
She had called home earlier to say she was coming back.
When Ji Yuan arrived, both her parents were at home. Occasionally, during school holidays, Ji Yuan would usually go home, so her parents didn't find their daughter's return particularly unusual or nostalgic. Instead, they asked her if she was planning on getting married and was coming home to prepare. The Ji parents had no idea they had broken up. When asked, Ji Yuan, thinking that it was better to have short pain than long pain, spoke the truth straight away. The outcome was as one could imagine. The live fish that Gu's mother had specifically bought for her daughter was left in the sink, uncooked, for she had no appetite. Defying the typical male stoicism, Gu's father nagged. "How could you have broken up?" "What, he didn't want you?" Ji Yuan said. "Dad, everyone has their own aspirations, and besides, I'll surely find someone better than him in the future."
But that wasn't what upset Gu's parents.
You can know a person's face but not their heart. How come we never saw that he was such an ingrate? Gu's mother finally couldn't contain herself and began to curse out loud. Just as Ji Yuan thought, her parents had always treated Zitsong as their half-son. His sudden betrayal cut the Ji parents deeply, as if their own son had betrayed them. The house Ji Yuan chose was in District J. At the time, when Zitsong found out she planned to buy the house there, although he didn't say much, his look of slight disdain was undeniable, thinking, "Isn't Ji Yuan just being petty?"
How can you be petty when it comes to investment?
Being petty equates to buying trash because things that are valuable are fundamentally based on their worth. According to Zitsong, even if it meant taking on debt, one should borrow more money to buy houses in District B. There's only a river separating District B and District N in this city, yet their housing prices are worlds apart. At that time, the average price in District B was double that of District N. Of course, this was because of better development in District B compared to District N. When Ji Yuan acquired this house, it was precisely when everyone was most disappointed in the housing prices in District N, and many investors were having fire sales. Who could have imagined that 3 years later, the city's policymakers would suddenly announce a plan to merge District B and District N? They decided to build more connections in District N and continue extending the developments outward. As a result, District N's housing prices were bound to align with those of District B and might even double because it was clear that now District N had more room for development than District B. In effect, the house that Ji Yuan invested in not only doubled in value, it was expected to double again, stacking a double on top of another double. And if one followed Zitsong's investment strategy, now the housing price in District B, from 3 years ago to 3 years later, had appreciated by less than a third. Now that the inside information had just come out and investors were swarming in, the housing prices were already doubling. Zitsong was indeed clever, well-informed, and as soon as he learned about it, he immediately had his mom bring 100,000 to trick Ji Yuan, wanting a slice of the pie. If it were a man sincerely struggling together with her, Ji Yuan definitely wouldn't mind the money. The home belonged to both of them, her money was also his. But now that he was unkind, how could she be righteous? She wouldn't let him take a penny from her. How could you guess they were going to merge there?
Su Yixiao admired Ji Yuan immensely.
She had chosen her property during the lowest dip in prices in District N 3 years ago, equating to the most valuable investment efficiency. 3 years ago, no one thought District N and District B would merge. Otherwise, no one would have desperately sold their properties in District N back then. Maybe even the policymakers hadn't thought they would merge the two districts at that time. Ji Yuan's answer was simple, because 3 years later, the land in District B was destined to be insufficient.
Ji Yuan didn't know what to say about that.
Of course, if Zitsong wanted to completely forget the debt of favors he owed the Ji family, the Ji family would certainly not agree. Just wait. Gu's mother and daughter shared the same stubborn temperament. I want to see when he gets struck by lightning. Gu's father was startled by her words and muttered, "You don't need to curse him. Besides, our daughter will definitely marry someone better than him." Do I even need to say it? Standing with her hands on her hips, Gu's mother confidently told her daughter, "You should find someone wealthier than him." Zitsong could hardly be considered wealthy, he was at best a pretty boy who had snagged a wealthy patron, Ji Yuan thought. In fact, she was somewhat curious about what kind of wealthy young lady Wa Zitsong had lured. Vaguely, it seemed there was something she didn't know. The whole family exhaled in unison. Gu's father collapsed into the sofa, scratching his head, and called out, "Dinner! Dinner!" Looking up at the clock, by this curse, it was already 7 o'clock in the evening. Ji Yuan joined her mother in the kitchen to prepare dinner. Due to the rush, they simply made 2 or 3 easy home-cooked dishes. While the family was eating dinner, the doorbell rang. Who could that be? Gu's mother wondered. Gu's father did not look up. It must be one of your chatty co-workers who likes to drop by. Gu's mother had worked at an electric power plant and had retired early. Most of her friends were from the plant. After retirement, the loneliness at home was inevitable, so she often visited neighbors. Visiting after dinner to chat was a common occurrence. But Gu's mother remembered that her group of friends were usually too busy with family in the evenings to visit. Rather, it was Gu's father's friends who loved to play mahjong at night. Of course, Gu's father never gathered his friends for mahjong at home. The two of them thought it through but finally turned their gaze toward their daughter. Ji Yuan said, "I only told my family." Ji Yuan had some friends in her hometown, but they were just acquaintances with whom she barely kept in touch. Naturally, she wouldn't have specifically notified them of her brief return. Unable to guess who it might be, Gu's mother told her daughter to stay seated while she went to answer the door, fearing her often absent daughter might not recognize the visitor and inadvertently be rude. Moreover, her daughter's hearing problem was always something to be careful about. Ji Yuan stood up and began clearing the dining table. Gu's father, in his slippers, walked into the hallway leading to the front door to take a look. Hearing Gu's mother exclaim in surprise, "Why are you here?" Third aunt. This third aunt was a cousin of Gu's father, surnamed Chiu. Chiu third aunt entered the Gu's living room, looked around, and asked, "Have you considered moving to a new house?" Both Gu's father and mother were speechless. All their savings had gone into their daughter's dowry. At that moment, Chiu third aunt saw Ji Yuan, her lips slightly curved, and said, "Ji Yuan is home. Are you planning to get married? Did your parents put the money for a new house into buying a house for you?" Gu's mother abruptly tugged at Gu's father's sleeve. Gu's father gave Gu's mother a helpless look. He couldn't figure out why Chiu third aunt had come. Chiu third aunt probably visited their home less than once a year. Since Chiu third aunt didn't live nearby and was wealthy, as the saying goes, rich relatives do not like to associate with poor ones and only poor relatives like to cling to the legs of rich ones. Therefore, Chiu third aunt generally did not think of visiting the Gu's. "Take a seat, third aunt," Ji Yuan replied calmly to Chiu third aunt's clearly barbed remark, assuming that Chiu third aunt believed she couldn't hear. It wasn't uncommon to have 1 or 2 such characters among relatives. It wasn't unique to their family. Chiu third aunt really sat down, sinking into the sofa like a dead fish, exhaling a long breath. Caught by surprise at her unprecedented expression, Gu's mother stepped forward and asked, "What happened?" Pointing to her legs, Chiu third aunt said, "Do you know how far I walked this afternoon?" Of course, Gu's mother couldn't answer. Although Chiu third aunt was wealthy and preferred taking taxis over driving, she never needed to walk. Why had Chiu third aunt suddenly walked on her own? Looking at her intently, as if drilling into Gu's mother's face, Chiu third aunt asked, "Didn't the two of you buy a house in the city?" Said Gu's mother, "You know we did. The house you bought 3 years ago has appreciated. I heard it's now worth more than double. I remember you bought it for around 1 million. Now, that house is said to have risen to 3 or 4 million. You two really know how to invest. I had no clue before." Gu's parents were stunned as if struck by lightning. What? They had been so preoccupied with digesting Wa Zitsong's betrayal that they had forgotten about that property. It seemed they hadn't actually lost money. Looking up with a smile, Chiu third aunt watched them and said, "Since you are so good at buying houses, why don't you give me some advice? I was wondering if I should sell mine." Wealthy people have access to a multitude of information channels. It should be said that Aunt Chiu had noticed the house the Jiu family bought only because she had heard about it when they made the purchase, and just like Wa Zitsong and the others, she had shown utter disdain. Back then, Aunt Chiu thought the Jiu family had bought a piece of junk for their daughter and were just waiting for its value to continue to depreciate. Among relatives, there's inevitably the spirit of comparison. Aunt Chiu really wanted to see the Jiu family's real estate devalue just as she had imagined, which would, on one hand, prove her own investment expertise and give her the opportunity to ridicule them. If they wanted to invest, why didn't they ask her, Aunt Chiu? Who would have known that 3 years later, The GU family's return had more than doubled, and now it was Aunt Xiao who was green with envy. GU Nuan only knew one thing: greedy people are never satisfied with their wealth in their lifetime. Even if Aunt Xiao owned Jinshan, knowing that the GU family had unexpectedly made money, she would feel jealous and envious, because Aunt Xiao was a typical greedy person.
How could she know anything about investment?
Faced with Aunt Xiao's probing, Gu's mother could only, with a glance, indicate her daughter. The GU family couple definitely hadn't bought the house with any investment purpose in mind. It was purely for their daughter's dowry. The selection of the house was most important to the liking of their daughter and son-in-law. Therefore, the task of choosing a house was entirely left to their daughter. The elderly couple simply provided the savings.
Could it be that their daughter was so skilled at buying houses?
They knew their daughter studied finance, but what finance was and what it was for, given the GU couple's own primary school education level, they simply didn't understand. They couldn't understand the explanation from their daughter either. Now with Aunt Xiao's comments, could it be that their daughter was studying a major related to buying houses?
Gu's mother was utterly confused.
While Gu's father stepped forward to talk with Aunt Xiao, she pulled her daughter aside in a corner and, writing on her daughter's hand, asked, "Has the price of the house in the city gone up?"
Yes, GU Nuan nodded.
"When did that happen?"
"Just in the past week or two," she replied.
Aunt Xiao had gotten the news faster than the GU parents. Aunt Xiao had heard someone mention it in the city. But when had Aunt Xiao started to pay attention to the GU family's house? Gu's mother was full of doubts and asked her daughter, "What do you think we should do now?" She wasn't sure if her daughter truly knew how to buy a house, as she had never heard before that her daughter was particularly good at it. What if they give rash advice to the relatives who then turn around and hold the GU family accountable? GU Nuan, however, felt that someone like Aunt Xiao wouldn't really have respect for the GU family. She was just momentarily upset and looking for some comfort by coming to their house. With that in mind, not giving any advice and listening to what Aunt Xiao actually had to say was better than potentially dealing with endless trouble from her. Aunt Xiao said to Gu's father, "I have a house in the west suburb. You remember it, right?"
Gu's father didn't quite recall this matter. Aunt Xiao's family had plenty of money and wealth.
He only knew that Aunt Xiao's husband was a factory owner with a large annual sales volume, which naturally meant they had a lot of money. As for Aunt Xiao's husband spending money on buying a house, that was not surprising in the least. Seeing that Gu's father was listening but not fully understanding, Aunt Xiao said, "That's the house left by my father, not my husband's." GU dad grunted. "That piece of land, have you renovated the house?" Although rural land is collectively owned, each household still gets a plot of land based on quotas. Like Qiu Sanjiyu's parental home, Qiu Dad received a piece of land. After Qiu Dad passed away, this land ended up in the hands of his only daughter Qiu Sanjiyu. Both Qiu Sanjiyu and her husband's household registrations remained in the countryside and were never transferred to the city. Precisely because of this, Qiu Sanjiyu undoubtedly hit the jackpot just as the domestic real estate development boom needed land. Nowadays, farmers are not fools. They know that land is valuable and won't sell it off easily. Gu Nuan thought, Qiu Sanjiyu's dilemma should not be whether to sell or not, but rather how much to sell it for. Just like buying a house in the city, purchasing and developing land in the countryside also depends on its location and the potential for appreciation. Therefore, rural land in good locations commands a high price. Conversely, land in poor locations with no popularity has low prices to the point where no one wants it, which is quite normal. The land that Qiu Sanjiyu inherited from her father is collective land and definitely cannot be traded privately. It can only be contracted out. Who would want to buy Qiu Sanjiyu's house? Both Jiu Dad and Jiu Mom couldn't help but feel a bit puzzled upon hearing this. Houses built on collective land are called small property rights houses, like the one they live in. Such houses can't be issued property certificates, have no property rights, and are now unwanted by many people. With her daughter's reminder, Jiu Mom didn't rush to refuse and asked Qiu Sanjiyu, "Who wants your house? Is the offer high?" Qiu Sanjiyu frowned and said, "It's hard to say whether the offer is high. But my house, it has always been unasked for. I originally planned to renovate my dad's house, so that I could live there as a rural retreat whenever I got tired of living in the city's residential community. However, I've been too busy with things in the city and never found the time. The house was expensive to build back then. I spent tens of thousands on materials and labor. It has 3 floors, like a small villa. It's a waste to leave it empty and I feared it would deteriorate, so I decided to rent it out."
Rich people really have too much spare cash.
Even a house in the old home can be transformed into a villa.
To think, she can even rent out a villa. Jiu Mom and Jiu Dad exchanged glances.
Considering Chio Sanjiyu's level of wealth, now she was coming to their poor family for ideas. Wasn't that laughable? No matter how much Chio Sanjiyu wrestled with it internally, what she said indicated that she had finally managed to rent out the house, and that tenant astonishingly expressed a desire to buy her house. He offered this number.
Chio Sanjiyu raised 8 fingers. 80,000.
Jiyu Mom, based on her understanding, could only think of this figure.
Chio Sanjiyu herself had said the house was unwanted.
Chio Sanjiyu immediately rolled her eyes at her aunt. What, 80,000? That's not even enough to cover the construction costs.
It's 305,000.
You raise 8 fingers. How is anyone supposed to know it's 305,000? Everyone would think it's 80,000.
Jiyu Mom complained internally.
What was curious was why it wasn't a flat 300,000 but 305,000. Chio Sanjiyu divulged the reason. Because he said 300,000, I asked for a bit more, so he added another 5,000.
Jiyu Mom was utterly speechless. This person buying the house was quite stingy.
In the end, who took a fancy to the rural small villa that Chio Sanjiyu built for herself? He said living in my house feels like it has good feng shui and brings him luck, that's why he wants to buy my house. Knowing that I only spent about 100,000 building it, offering this price is quite generous, explained Chio Sanjiyu.
Is he really just an ordinary tenant? Jiyu Nuan's eyelids drooped slightly.
According to Aunt Chio's explanation, that tenant was more than generous. Offering twice the cost for a house that nobody wanted was like a pie falling from the sky. Aunt Chio had initially felt the same way. However, after hearing that the Jiyu family had sold their junk house for more than 3 to 4 times the price, she started feeling that perhaps she had sold hers too cheaply. Of course, she also knew that not everyone was as lucky as the Jiyu family with junk houses. Some remain unsold for a lifetime. If she didn't sell it now, it might really turn into a haunted house, and she wouldn't get a penny for it. Do I even need to think about whether to sell this house or not? Gu's father didn't even need to think. Even if you sold that house, it's useless. Isn't it a small property house?
I think that person is also foolish.
Where do such people come from, having too much money or what? Aunt Chio laughed when she heard this. Right? That's what I thought too. Gu's mother wanted to say something, but her daughter secretly tugged at her, and she fell silent. Aunt Chio had a cup of tea at their place and then said she was leaving.
Gu's father saw Aunt Chio out.
Taking advantage of the fact that her father was not at home, Jiyu Nuan said to her mother, I remember, her house is built on the mountain. Gu's mother recalled, You remember more clearly than I do.
Their family must have gotten the mountain land.
She then looked up at her daughter. Why? Is there a problem?
It really depends on what the contract she signed with that person stipulates.
When someone bought her house, they certainly didn't buy something without clear ownership rights. Wealthy people, who even have leisure time to come for vacations, definitely know about such things. That's why Jiyu Nuan didn't plan to discuss this in front of her father and his relatives. Otherwise, wouldn't such a statement make her father look foolish? Gu's father had just called that astute investor a fool. You mean that person wasn't a tenant?
Gu's mother was surprised.
Aunt Chio had said that someone came for a vacation and liked her house so much they bought it. Jiyu Nuan laughed out loud, knowing such a thing was unlikely. Aunt Chio's house was built on a mountain, standing alone. Just see how many years Aunt Chio had it built and she never lived in it herself. Is it truly because she was too busy with city matters? No, just looking at how Aunt Chio's house was released for rent but never got tenants tells you why it stood alone on the mountain like a haunted house. Only those with a specific intent would be interested in Aunt Chio's house. Plainly speaking, they were after the piece of land Aunt Chio owned. Maybe a big corporation is planning to acquire land here recently, and they discovered that the land her house is on is good. Just using her house as a breakthrough, the price could probably be secured for less than half the market value. Gu's mother didn't really understand all the complex points her daughter made, feeling only that her daughter was hinting. Are you saying she sold it cheaply? Impossible, right? Selling that haunted house for 300,000 and that's cheap? Jiyu Nuan said. Mom, you know about the nail households, right? A nail household can grind down and usually get much more money than others. What she did was a total loss, absolutely a loss-making deal. It can only be said she just encountered a sly old fox who knew how to discreetly remove this nail from her house, then deal with the land price, effectively doubling their accomplishment. Investors work precisely like this, making you feel it's fair at the moment you sell, sometimes even offering a higher price for your assets. Just like 3 years ago when Jiyu Nuan bought the house from that landlord, raising her offer by 5%, effectively edging out another competitor because she had already meticulously calculated the cost price in her mind. Worth it. Now, those who sold her the house, and the ones who competed with her for that house back then, must be regretting it enough to consider jumping into a river.
Gu's mother's mind still hadn't caught up, and she stared at her daughter in a daze.
Gu's father, who had just seen off Aunt Xiao, hurried back, and just happened to overhear his daughter's words at the entrance, which also startled him.
After all, it was his own cousin.
Gu's father pondered for a while, then turned and walked to the staircase to call Aunt Xiao. The next day, since Jiyu Nuan had returned home, she couldn't just talk and leave. She definitely needed to stay for a couple of days. So, it was a good opportunity to help her mother tidy up the house.
Summer had arrived.
Things like quilts needed to be taken out for airing. As Jiyu Nuan spread out the quilts on the bamboo poles, she comforted her mother by saying, "I've started looking for someone to decorate the house. When it's done, you and Dad can move into the city together."
"What do we move there for? We have no friends there."
"If you get married, we might move there to help you take care of your children," Gu's mother said practically, not the least bit enthralled by the big city. Especially with examples of someone like Wa Zitsong who deteriorated after going to the city, she felt it definitely wasn't a good place.
What her mother said wasn't entirely without reason. Jiyu Nuan respected her parents' choices.
Gu's mother then asked her, "You're getting someone to renovate your house?
Where did you get the money for that? Did you find a job?"
When it came to her daughter's job search, Gu's mother was certainly worried. Her own daughter had a hearing impairment. Most companies would likely be unwelcoming. And as for civil service exams, she would probably not pass the physical examination. However, Jiyu Nuan wasn't very worried about it and said, "The renovation is just getting a designer friend to come over and plan it out for now, haven't spent any money on it yet.
I plan to start once I have a budget from my salary.
I used the money I earned from helping the professor write papers at school to pay the mortgage, with none left over. The professor has recommended some work units to me, so I think finding a job won't be too difficult."
The daughter was full of confidence.
Gu's mother stopped what she was doing and looked at Jiyu Nuan. "I don't know what your academic performance at school was like. However, back then, did you and Zitsong break up because you chose to pursue a master's degree while he went to work?" Why one pursued a master's degree and the other went to work, Jiyu Nuan didn't tell anyone. In reality, she and Wa Zitsong were competitors. Contrary to what everyone thought, pursuing a master's degree was much easier than getting into a good company. Now, graduate schools are expanding their enrollment for fear of not having enough applicants. Good company recruitment, on the other hand, is like thousands vying to cross a single log bridge. The competition can be brutally fierce. The company Wa Zitsong joined was not just any investment firm, it was called MN, one of the top 500 globally. With the level of the finance and economics college they attended, considered a second-tier university, it was nearly impossible to get into MN. But her and Wa Zitsong's performance at school was indeed outstanding. Her grades were even a bit better than Wa Zitsong's.
In such circumstances, she chose to withdraw.
Of course, she knew then that there might never be such a good opportunity again because not all companies are like MN, both excellent and indifferent to her being deaf. But after all, Wa Zitsong was the man she was supposed to marry. Thinking about the future, as a couple, a man without a job couldn't simply stay at home like a housewife. Wa Zitsong had once sworn to her, "Jiyu Nuan, it doesn't matter if you don't have a job, I can provide for you." The end result, he cheated on her. In such matters, a woman always needs to learn from her missteps. The idea that the longer the time together, the stronger the bond, is all nonsense. Experience shows that people are fickle by nature. After hanging the quilts, someone rushed to the door in a hurry. Gu's mother was startled. "Aunt Xiao." Aunt Xiao hustled back, pushing open the Jiyu family's gate, still panting from her rush. "Between breaths," she said, "last night, your husband suddenly called me and advised me not to hurry with selling the house."
Gu's mother hadn't recovered from her confusion. Considering Gu's father didn't say a word after dropping people off last night,
Aunt Xiao didn't care what Gu's mother was thinking and was the first to enter the Jiyu family's door. Gu's mother grabbed the hem of her clothes to stop her. "Who are you looking for?" Seeing Aunt Xiao's aggressive demeanor as if she wanted to settle accounts with someone, Gu's mother became more vigilant.
Aunt Xiao wasn't there to settle scores.
Seeing the questioning look on Gu's mother's face, she burst into laughter. "Sister-in-law, you've misunderstood."
"What have I misunderstood?"
"You're clearly here because of that apartment of yours." Despite seeming clueless about financial matters, she could see through people, hitting the nail on the head. Aunt Xiao appeared to have no intention of hiding anything. Since everything was out in the open after last night's conversation, she confessed, "Your husband advised me not to rush the sale. He couldn't give a valid explanation, he just implied that I should be more cautious.
So, I told the other party this morning I needed to consult with my family again.
They asked if the price was too low and were willing to add a few more tens of thousands." Add a few more tens of thousands? According to her daughter last night, just adding a few tens of thousands meant the house would still be sold too cheaply, at a loss. Thinking this, Gu's mother didn't say a word. Seeing her silence, Aunt Cho figured it out and asked, "Ji Yuan told you, right?" "What?"
Gu's mother let something slip before she could react. "There's no need to lie to me. Your husband has told me everything."
Because I kept asking him how he knew the other party would definitely raise their offer, he couldn't explain and said it was Ji Yuan who had said it. Gu's mother curled her lip, then looked towards the door, no sign of her husband. Gu's father really knew how to act. Thinking he had done a good deed, he left the mess for others and skedaddled. "Aren't we all relatives?" Aunt Cho began to complain to Gu's mother. "If we weren't relatives, I wouldn't have come to ask."
"Great. Now we're relatives. What about before?"
"When there was no benefit, you were afraid to lend you money, so of course, we weren't relatives then." Only Gu's father still valued this kind of relative. Gu's mother was secretly angry with Gu's father, but since he had already spilled the beans, the whole affair couldn't be concealed any longer. Ji Yuan doesn't know anything.
She was just talking nonsense.
How would she know that she'd hit the mark? Gu's mother covered for her daughter. "All right then." Aunt Cho glared at her and then, her face breaking into a smile, said, "I'll ask Ji Yuan to be my advisor. Once the house is sold, I'll give Ji Yuan a consultancy fee. That's generous of me, right? Normally, relatives wouldn't need to go to such lengths. Between relatives, help is usually expected for free. The problem is, when you needed help in the past, didn't you avoid us?
Afraid that we would ask you for money.
Now you're generously offering money because there's profit to be had. Can that even be called being relatives?
It's absurd that you can say such a thing."
The more Gu's mother thought about it, the angrier she became, just about to shake off Aunt Cho's hand. Just then, Ji Yuan, seeing that her mother had gone to open the door and not come in, walked to the entrance. "Ji Yuan," Aunt Cho called out to her with a tone and expression of warmth. Ji Yuan replied indifferently, with a slight smile at the corner of her mouth. "Aunt Cho, why are you here? Looking for my father?" "Your father told me to find you." Gu's mother turned to make a phone call, intending to give Gu's father an earful. Fearing Ji Yuan wouldn't hear her, Aunt Cho took out a notebook and pen she had prepared and began writing in it to show Ji Yuan. "Aunt Cho wants to sell the house."
Ji Yuan asked calmly upon reading what she wrote.
"Yes," said Aunt Cho, "but as I mentioned last night, I definitely can't sell it at a low price. What do you think? How many tens of thousands can I sell this house for?" Ji Yuan did not respond, silent as if deep in thought. After what felt like ages without a reply from Ji Yuan, Aunt Cho's husband, who was in business, had a sudden realization. He grabbed Ji Yuan's hand and said, "Don't worry, I just talked to your mom. When the time comes, if the house sells for a good price, your family will definitely benefit, and at the very least, you will."
Your Aunt Cho, have money and will not shortchange you. I'm not that stingy." This statement almost made Ji Yuan laugh.
Just like Ji Yuan's mother, she was well aware that Aunt Cho was only thinking of the money. Although she accused the Ji family of being money grubbers, in truth, Aunt Cho herself was the one who cared about money the most. You could say that Aunt Cho was a clever one. After all, her husband was a businessman and she knew some tricks of the trade. Sometimes, to make money, you need to rely on others. Giving someone a small cut to secure a bigger deal was not wrong. It's better than not making any money at all. However, Aunt Cho thought Ji Yuan didn't understand these tactics and that she would be eternally grateful for this little share.
But she was wrong.
Ji Yuan said, "Aunt Cho, we're family. Talking about money."
"Never mind that."
Aunt Cho interrupted, feigning generosity. "Just tell me how much you want for your consultancy fee. When I have things handled outside, I pay for services too. I just figured, instead of others making that money, it might as well stay in the family. Better to keep it within the family than give it to outsiders." Ji Yuan was aware that Aunt Cho wouldn't have come to the Ji family unless she had consulted others first. How could Aunt Cho possibly place her hopes on the Ji family, whom she had always looked down upon, and on Ji Yuan, a girl barely mentioned as having any experience in selling anything? Most likely, the people Aunt Xiao consulted with had done the calculations for her and suggested she should sell. Then this morning, when she realized that there might be room for the property's value to increase, she found that Jiyu Nuan, who held a different opinion, was the only one who seemed to be correct. With no choice, Aunt Xiao had come crawling back to ask Jiyu Nuan for help, swallowing her pride. In a deal, whoever comes begging has to take the initiative and gains the power to set the price. Without needing to think too hard, Jiyu Nuan said, "Since Aunt Xiao has brought it up, not accepting it would seem almost rude."
Aunt Xiao nodded contentedly.
Thinking that Jiyu Nuan wouldn't ask for much after such an offer, she pretended to be generous and said, "What if I give you 10,000 for your consultancy fee?"
Jiyu Nuan shook her head.
"When the deal is done and we settle on a price, I'll take 1% of the final sales price."
1%? How much was that?
Aunt Xiao quickly did the math in her head and worked out. If that house sold for 500,000, 1% would only be 5,000?
Less than the 10,000 she'd offered outright.
Clearly, this girl had no idea how to calculate. The Jiyu family seemed foolish, and while Jiyu Nuan might have an eye for investment, ultimately, she was just as foolish as her parents. Aunt Xiao felt reassured and, smiling, grasped Jiyu Nuan's hand. "Isn't that a bit too little? I can give you 10,000. "No need, just 1%.
"All right.
"I keep my word," declared Aunt Xiao grandly to the entire Jiyu household. "In front of your mother, I'll give you a 1% consultancy fee."
Jiyu Nuan's mother looked at her daughter, not understanding why she had asked for 1%.
Yet Aunt Xiao, the miser, had readily agreed, which meant she must have done her calculations. Could her daughter be at a loss? To her mother's doubts, Jiyu Nuan offered only a reassuring glance. Later on, Jiyu Nuan's mother thought that since her daughter was not greedy for money, it could be seen as helping out the people on her father's side of the family. Let it be. She would have to talk to her husband later and ask Aunt Xiao not to take advantage of their daughter. Jiyu Nuan returned to her room to change into a new outfit in preparation for meeting the buyer with Aunt Xiao. Aunt Xiao sat in the Jiyu household and drank another cup of tea. After about the time it took to drink half a cup, she saw Jiyu Nuan come out. When Jiyu Nuan stayed at home, she would wear casual clothes, a simple t-shirt and jeans, not particularly attractive and a bit plain. Now, after getting dressed, she came out wearing a shirt typical of office workers, paired with dress pants. Though it was just a suit, it gave off a bit of an auntie vibe. However, it was bought from a brand store and, in terms of design and material, was trendy and at the forefront of fashion. Jiyu Nuan herself was tall and slender, so wearing a new outfit, her whole appearance transformed. Suddenly, she went from looking like a country girl from a small town to a white-collar professional from a big city. Aunt Xiao, who often visited big cities, recognized that with just Jiyu Nuan's look, she felt an unexpected sense of awe. Clothes make the man, they say, and it's true. However, it's those who know how to dress that reveal their personal qualities and taste, both of which are closely related to one's upbringing. In that moment, Aunt Xiao had to wonder, was the Jiyu family about to produce a golden phoenix? Since Qiu Sangu's house was some distance from the county town, going there on foot was definitely not feasible. After parting with Gu's mother, Jiyu Nuan accompanied Qiu Sangu in hailing a taxi in the county town and took a ride to Qiu Sangu's rural home. The journey took over half an hour, and there was no traffic jam in between, showing it was quite a distance away. Given its distance from the county town, the houses in the county itself were hard to sell. When it came to rural land development in the surrounding areas, it naturally fell behind other places. It's fair to say that the economic development of this county town was not very good. Jiyu Nuan knew that in the county town, most people ran small businesses. There were no major companies setting up there, let alone giants like state-owned enterprises that could directly drive local economic growth and become a leading economic force. Such a place, looking to develop its economy on its own, faced significant challenges. Unless, that is, the locals could create a renowned enterprise themselves. Was that possible? Born and raised in this area, Jiyu Nuan had never seen a major company or a famous entrepreneur emerge locally. It was precisely for this reason that W.A. Zitsong, when he left this place years ago, had told her, "I'd rather die than come back here." Economic stagnation to this extent in a place definitely suggested many deep-rooted issues, involving complex factors that couldn't be resolved by a single entrepreneur. W.A. Zitsong, after studying at university, understood this very well. His words made sense to Jiyu Nuan. Therefore, for Qiu Sangu's family to be considered among the wealthier ones locally, by Jiyu family standards, was significant. However, It bears mentioning that Cheo Sang-goo's husband's factory was just a food processing plant, dealing with some local preserved food products. Thanks to decent sales, he qualified as a small business owner. What's the definition of a small business owner in the countryside? Having made a few million. Owning a self-built house looking quite luxurious from the outside, with rather lavish furniture.
But the land was actually cheap. After all, it was their own.
The cost of building the house was probably at most several $100,000.
Those with some spare cash would invest.
A few years ago, with money to spare, Cheo Sang-goo followed the trend and invested in real estate. Yet, she wasn't among the earliest to do so. The era when anyone in the property market could make a profit by buying any property had passed. Nowadays, buying a house required an investor with a keen eye for value. Otherwise, the chosen property might depreciate instead of appreciate. For instance, houses bought in 2007 compared to those bought in 2009 or 2010, those who bought in 2007 saw any property they bought appreciate. For houses bought in 2009 or 2010, it was no longer a sure thing. Cheo Sang-goo was relatively lucky. Having listened to a friend, she bought an apartment in the city nearest to the county town. That city could only be considered a medium-sized one, with a population only slightly larger than the county towns. The potential for increase in property value was limited. The apartment Cheo Sang-goo bought went from around 4,000 to 5,000 per square meter to around 6,000 after 5 years. Cheo Sang-goo felt that her property appreciating 1,000 per square meter was proof of her excellent investment acumen, which is why she looked down on the Gu family's property purchases. What kind of property did the Gu family buy? Not only did they not have the money, requiring a bank loan to make the purchase, but it was also said that the area they bought in consisted of the properties others didn't want. Most people domestically prefer to buy on the rise rather than on the decline.
Cheo Sang-goo was a typical example of this mindset. In her eyes, those who bought on the decline were mostly fools.
Setting aside the fact that Cheo Sang-goo now knew that the property the Gu family bought actually showed a keen investment insight, to speak the truth, the apartment Cheo Sang-goo had that appreciated 1,000 per square meter. In Gu Nuon's view, that was an absolute investment failure.
Buying a house isn't such an easy thing.
First, if you're buying a house as an investment, you definitely have to consider whether to sell it or rent it. The rental yield of domestic properties has always been very low. The city where finances aren't invested in that property doesn't have a large population, and there's more than enough housing available for rent, which makes it impossible to raise the rent. Finances Aunt also knew this and was definitely looking for a good opportunity to sell the house. I believe that's what everyone who invests in real estate in the country thinks.
They wait for the right moment to cash out.
How does an average person calculate a successful investment? If the money made from the sale of the house is more than what was paid for it, isn't that a successful investment? Gu Nuon, who studied finance, would never think that way. Investment is all about the return on investment, ROI. In finance, ROI needs to be compared across multiple projects both vertically and horizontally. Simply calculating the ROI of a single project on its own is essentially meaningless for an investor who specializes in investing. Even if the property goes up in value by 1,000 per square meter, if it's not rented out during that period, it means it generates no income while sitting empty. The property's future value might depreciate rather than appreciate, because if there's no continuing net influx of urban population, the room for property value increase is limited. Even if it's sold now, after paying taxes and other costs, which are to be included in the principal, the actual return might be less than expected. On a horizontal comparison, if the money spent on buying the property had been invested in other projects, the ROI could be higher. For instance, investing in properties in major cities. The property values in big cities can increase much more over 5 years, and the likelihood of them continuing to appreciate is greater. On a vertical comparison, the domestic currency has been consistently depreciating. Such a small increase in value is not sufficient to offset inflation. To put it more bluntly, the returns from Finances Aunt's property investment are just marginally higher than the yields from government bonds. Then, with a more respectable title, I made a fortune investing in property, she keeps up with the times. That said, considering the state of Finances Aunt's husband's business, Gu Nuon would think that Finances Aunt was blind to have bought that property. It's simple. The property isn't easy to sell, meaning it can be quite difficult to find a buyer. You can ask for a high price, but when you urgently need money and are in a hurry to sell, can you really sell it at its market value?
No. Finances Aunt's husband is just a small local entrepreneur.
Even the bosses of major companies may find themselves in a liquidity crunch that requires them to liquidate their fixed asset investments to obtain capital for business operations and bail out their companies. If Finance's aunt's husband should find himself in an unfortunate situation where he urgently needs money, it's very likely they'd have to sell the property at a low price. At that time, there would be no point crying over it.
At this point, we can't say that Finance's aunt is completely without merit. She actually has really good luck.
Ji Yuan can only remember how both her mother and father would say that Finance's aunt's luck was extraordinary. Among all the relatives of Gu's father, it was Finance's aunt who was the luckiest. Being the least attractive among her sisters at home, she still managed to marry a business owner and enjoy the life of a lady. What doggone luck. Yes, some people are just born lucky, the kind of doggone luck that no amount of jealousy or envy can change. It's like what somebody said, there's nothing I can do about it. Being rich is just my destiny. Now that they've gotten out of the car, Ji Yuan looked up and saw the mountainside inherited by Finance's aunt from her father. Is it really just exceptional doggone luck?
No. It's because Finance's aunt's father was the person in the village with the most investment foresight.
On the way up the mountain, Chiu Sanggu started to tell Ji Yuan about the house she owned in the city, which was undoubtedly a way to flaunt it to Ji Yuan. Ji Yuan's indifferent gaze remained on the roadside. Unaware bystanders might think it was the nature of a little girl who likes flowers and plants. The value of a house depends not only on the house itself but also significantly on its surroundings.
Ji Yuan knew that there must be something exceptional about this house.
Otherwise, Chiu Sanggu's father wouldn't have contracted it when everyone else in the village was uninterested in this plot of land. Chiu Sanggu, however, didn't see it that way, and said, "My dad must have been bewitched back then. When the village was divided land, everyone else got fertile fields where crops grew quickly.
No one wanted this wasteland. It's mountain land. What can you grow? Now, they say plant some kind of economic orchard.
But consider the labor costs and everything. Growing orchards in the mountains requires more expensive labor and carrying fertilizer is much harder. Besides, it's hard to say what can be grown on such barren soil. Anyway, I can't understand how he was deceived by people. There was good land both before and after this plot, but he didn't get any, just got stuck with this abandoned piece."
Ji Yuan's lips slightly curved.
Good land before and after, only a wasteland in between.
Chiu Sanggu still hadn't spotted anything odd.
But, back then, Chiu Sanggu's father had already foreseen today's real estate industry's potential.
When did Chiu Sanggu's father pass away?
My dad. Chiu Sanggu sighed. Died 6 years ago. He got this plot of land just before then. 6 or 7 years ago, Ji Yuan remembered, there were fluctuations in domestic real estate, which undoubtedly was at its peak now, but had also seen a golden era before that. It seemed that the market's nature decided that any commodity's fate was to rise and fall. It appeared Chiu Sanggu's father had glimpsed the vicissitudes of the real estate sector, thus gaining some foresight. Speaking of which, Chiu Sanggu had some friends in the big city, but these friends, it was said, were not those Chiu Sanggu had made herself, but old friends of her father who had moved to the big city. Chiu Sanggu was not secretive about it. She suddenly turned around, glanced at Ji Yuan subconsciously, and said, "I heard you are doing pretty well in your university studies." Ji Yuan thought, surely, Chiu Sanggu had shared her stories with those friends in the big city.
Chiu Sanggu speaking of her was just because of dislike. It was dislike.
Ji Yuan knew it, as her mom often mentioned that in the Ji family, she was the only one who went to college. Of course, that wasn't to say that Ji Yuan was exceptionally outstanding. It's just that, in her mom's family, going to college was common among the children. Compared to some cousins, Ji Yuan's second-tier college degree hardly stood out. However, none of her dad's relatives had ever gone to college. Therefore, the Ji side often jested that their family had produced a female scholar.
Chiu Sanggu was quite wealthy.
Yet, her son dropped out in junior high, and her daughter barely maintained by sponsorships in a local high school. Thinking of this, Chiu Sanggu felt compelled to prove, poor people trying to change their fate through education is useless. No matter how well you, Ji Yuan, study, you're bound to disgrace yourself. Revealing everything about Ji Yuan was meant to let more people know how Ji Yuan would embarrass herself in the future. For such things, such people, it was enough to be aware of them oneself. Ji Yuan responded with little emotion. It's all right. No matter how well she did, she would not tell Chiu Sanggu it was good. Her mouth wasn't made for boasting. She believed actions should impress others. Aunt Chiu wanted to feel happy at these words, but she couldn't bring herself to be. After all, she was the one seeking Ji Yuan's help at the moment. They reached the midsection of the hillside. Though termed a mountainous area, it was actually just a low range of hills. Aunt Chio's house stood out, built in solitude upon it. Luck is luck. Had Aunt Chio not been one to show off, renovating her father's house and making it look more impressive, she probably wouldn't have attracted the attention of investors to this place. From a distance, Aunt Chio's newly built house, with its red and white color scheme and European villa style, was quite conspicuous. Upon hearing the sound of approaching visitors, whoosh, the house's iron gate opened first. A large black wolfhound, with a fierce and vigilant gaze, watched the newcomers. The wolfhound was not only tall and imposing, but its shape bore a striking resemblance to the guardian dog at the gates of hell from ancient Greek mythology. Ji Yuan felt a chill in her heart, knowing that just by the menacing look of the dog, it was a superior breed with a not insubstantial value.
Ji Yuan was not mistaken. This dog was a pure black German Shepherd. German Shepherds have always been known as the king of military dogs.
And black is the truest nature of a German Shepherd. Aunt Chio immediately said, "A wolfhound, my friend had one, I know." Ji Yuan glanced at the man standing next to the German Shepherd, thinking that he must be inwardly laughing his head off. The wolfhound Aunt Chio was referring to is the domestically bred black wolfhound from northern China, which cannot compare to the German Shepherd that ranks among the top 3 in the world. The man standing beside the German Shepherd appeared to be in his early 30s, wearing a suit and a tie, as if he had anticipated Aunt Chio's visit. Since business was to be negotiated and contracts possibly signed, it was necessary to dress formally. The other party seemed certain that Aunt Chio was there to sell the house. When Ji Yuan looked up, her gaze swept across the second and third floor windows of the small building. A row of tea-colored windowsills revealed vague shadows within, which could have been just furniture. "My niece," Aunt Chio introduced Ji Yuan to the man, before explaining to her, "This is Mr. Li."
"Mr. Li?"
Ji Yuan nodded slightly, quickly understanding that the tenant wasn't this Mr. Li. The real tenant was upstairs. This Mr. Li was just someone's assistant. After that, Mr. Li led them both into the house. "Where is Mr. Chiao?"
Aunt Chio asked.
"Mr. Chiao? The tenant of this house? Oh, he just happened to have something to attend to and went out," Mr. Li remarked with a smile, pouring tea for both women. "I always thought Mr. Chiao would find it inconvenient to go out," Aunt Chio commented. Ji Yuan carefully observed their conversation. It seemed the tenant was pretending to stay here for treatment or recovery purposes. Clearly, he was someone adept at pretense. "Mr. Chiao left instructions before going out," Mr. Li said after pouring the tea. He went on. "He said if Mrs. Chiao comes, proceed exactly as previously discussed with her. Have you made up your mind, Mrs. Chiao?"
Mr. Li formally shifted to the topic at hand.
Aunt Chio coughed softly, covering her mouth, and glanced at Ji Yuan with her eyes. Ji Yuan asked, "Have you drafted the contract? We'd like to see it first." "Sure." Mr. Li maintained his smile, placing the prepared contract, in duplicate, on the table. He then inquired about Ji Yuan. "Is this young lady a lawyer?" It's normal to bring a lawyer when signing a contract, so his question was quite expected. Yet Aunt Chio, eager to boast, said, "No, she studies finance." Ji Yuan could sense, whether it was from Mr. Li sitting opposite her or from what seemed to be glances projected from the ceiling, a sudden shift in their attention, yet it didn't alter their air of arrogance. Indeed, from the moment she entered the house, she sensed a certain condescension directed at others. Strangely enough, the house hadn't even been sold by Aunt Chio yet. This indicated the confidence of someone who must possess considerable self-assurance. To maintain such indifference, one's confidence must stem from an exceptionally strong foundation. Chio Sangu sat in her own house, holding a cup of tea, but constantly swallowing saliva. Contrasting sharply with Chio Sangu, Ji Yuan looked at the contract quietly, as if everything around her was just air.
Chio Sangu glanced at the contract in Ji Yuan's eyes.
She had actually read it once before, feeling it was just so, buying and selling a house, the price clearly written on it. She didn't know what Ji Yuan was looking at that seemed like picking ants off. If it were her, as long as she scanned how much money the other party was giving and when it was given, that was the most important thing. Money only mattered when it was in hand. Otherwise, nothing was of any use.
That was Chio Sangu's thought.
At this moment, Chio Sangu had no idea that above, on the ceiling, a pair of eyes were scanning the two of them sitting below. Ji Yuan finished reading the contract without any hurry to act, just gently scanned straight ahead. Without careful observation, she would not have noticed the camera mounted on the glass partition between the living room and the dining room. Was it Chio Sangu who had installed it in her own house? Or was it installed after the other party moved in? Either way, right now, someone was clearly watching through the camera, indicating that the camera was in operation and currently controlled by someone.
What could this imply?
It implied that the other party really wanted this house. The greater the desire, the control of the initiative. If the buyer is eager to buy, or the seller is eager to sell, whoever holds the initiative has the right to set the price. With a thought in her mind, Ji Yuan placed the contract on the coffee table and said, "I've looked at the contract.
Is there any problem?
If not, you should have brought your ID card. Then we can sign it." Mr. Lee on the other side, responsible for signing the contract with them, said.
Chiu Sangu translated Mr. Lee's words for Ji Yuan as she wrote them down in a notebook.
Ji Yuan nodded, then turned back to the other side and said, "We want to review the contract more carefully. However, if we're speaking about this current contract, we believe it's not suitable for signing."
"Why?"
Mr. Lee's face seemed to show a hint of incomprehension. "Of course, it's because your offer is too low." Chiu Sangu couldn't help but speak up first to raise the price.
"Low?"
Mr. Lee seemed displeased and said, "Your house, if put on the market, might not even sell for tens of thousands.
You should be very clear about this.
If it weren't for our Mr. Chiao feeling lucky to have stayed in your house."
Chiu Sangu started to swallow saliva in her throat again. She had almost no power to refute this point.
Indeed, her house, not even to rent, was wanted by anyone, let alone someone willing to buy it. Now, someone was offering 300,000 for her haunted house, and she was nearly thanking the heavens. But, wasn't it because of the hope Ji Yuan gave her? The hope that she could sell it for more than 300,000. Now, she only hoped Ji Yuan wasn't tricking her, causing her not to even be able to sell it for 300,000? Seeing Chiu Sangu getting anxious as her appetite was whetted, Ji Yuan proceeded at her own pace without haste. Her gaze swept over the contract on the table and said, "The issue is, you're not buying this house." "What do you mean we're not buying this house?"
"It's the land.
It's clearly written on the contract that you're buying the house and the land around the house. Although, you're well aware that this house and its land are collective land, which can't be privately sold. Thus your contract states that it's buying the land contracting and circulation rights, and according to these initial terms, unless you voluntarily withdraw, it's indefinite. Actually, this equates to buying and selling the land."
Well, truckers, this is all for this video.
Please let me know if you like this video,
so I can work on next part.